right. What are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting session in a sense that we all have, if we work in training, we all have to work with SMEs, or we are SMEs for that matter sometimes as well. And in our more than 12-year career producing e-learnings, we've seen so many different types of people being subject matter experts and actually committing so many different types of mistakes.
Right. A lot of them well-intended, we must say, right? So experts are experts. They aren't professionals in training, not necessarily. They are professionals in what they do. We talked about this, I think, in one of our previous breakfasts, where we spoke about how to work with them. But now the question is, if you wanted to make them a little bit better educators for whatever reason, maybe you want to empower them to build their own training and skip some of the instructional design steps that either you take on or INTEA takes on, or you want them to prepare better materials or better understand you as learning developers and have a better conversation with them. Ideally, you share this with your SMEs. We promise we don't. Well, we can't promise it's live, so we will try not to say anything to hurt them or provoke them. So feel free to share this with your subject matter experts before your next project or right away.
And as always, we have movies embedded in this presentation. Right. So the movie guessing game is always on, so try your luck.
Yes, if you're new to our breakfasts, yes, almost every slide features a scene from a movie. You can type them in comments. I enjoyed this particular presentation so much when we were building this that I thought, hey, we should raffle like a bottle of champagne to the best person. And then I thought, well, we would need something like a Kahoot system for that. So we'll probably do that one time. So today is the last time where you don't get champagne for the as the prize, so we use this as a training opportunity.
Absolutely. Right? Train your speed, right? Back to the Future, Liana's first. Sharon is probably a couple of seconds behind, so next time it's gonna be Kahoot.
Right. All right, so let's go. Well, before we begin the serious stuff, since this is SME experts and I was Googling movies about experts, I found this one. I have no idea what this is about. It has John Travolta in it. It has cost the producers $3 million to make in 1989.
Wow.
And it grossed worldwide like 150,000. So it must be a pretty terrible movie. If you learn anything today, don't watch this. Anyhow, so do we have a SME problem? Please, on a scale from 1 to 10, type in chat how likely you are, 10 being the most likely, absolutely sure, and 1 never, or never again. How likely are you to just
and we have a 10.
Excellent. I think Juliana will change her answer right here. So how likely are you to trust your SME to prepare learning material and give it to your learners without any oversight, and you will be kind of sure that it's a good training course and the response to that training will be positive?
Yeah, no, Juliana changes the answer to
right.
1, right?
Absolutely.
2. Okay, so
not very sure.
We are in low numbers, right?
Depends, right? So there are different types of SMEs. Okay, all right. Anyone else?
3. There are kind of the level of how brave you are grows right now. So 3, yes.
Not much, I would say. Right. Right. So generally, like, we do have an SME problem. There are excellent people who create excellent stuff, maybe out of experience, maybe out of sheer talent, maybe out of passion for actually teaching. Hence, they're the experts. But very often we go to people, sometimes, it's industry related.
Yeah.
Lawyers, you go to your law department, legal department, and you ask them to prepare materials for your next course on some sort of new regulation. And that's the end of it, right? So IT people are not great at creating easily digestible learning very often, and so on. So we do have a bit of a problem, and we at INTEA can definitely share that. In fact, we shared that not last time, but in one of the previous breakfasts, we talked about problems in working with SMEs. And so to just refer you back to that, I'll just remind you quickly that we identified 3 ways how you can make your life easier. One is motivation, right? You need to your SMEs are not motivated to build training with you by default. That's not part of their daily job, and you need to trick them, incentivize them, maybe sell it to them in some way, explain what's in it for them, and so on. You have to motivate them. Motivation always is the cause of difficulties in working with SMEs. The other part being management. You need to manage this process. You cannot rely on SMEs to be self-managed. You have to set expectations in terms of how much
time and effort
it will require from them, because their default assumptions can be very different. We spoke about people who thought they will work with us like 4 hours a day for the next 2 months. In fact, we only needed like a 4-hour interview once, and so on. So you have to manage the process, set deadlines, share progress, and so on. So it's about management. And finally, the kind of final elephant that this stands on is training. So you need to train your SMEs to be better educators. And that's a movie, by the way. Yeah, hang on. Yeah. Excellent. So training is important, and essentially today we will focus on the training part, right? Again, you can find that one, the SME problem and all others on our YouTube channel. And let's jump right into mistakes that SMEs make and how we can fix those. I think number one is that since they're the experts, they tend to assume a lot of things instead of analyzing them. They will come and tell you, yeah, everyone knows matrix, excellent. So there is no spoon, right? The expert comes to you and says, hey, I know that they need to know this and that, or I know where the problem lies, and so on. It's not their place to just come and assume that. They have to prove that. So you as a learning development person, you have to kind of be very, very aware of that and tell them immediately that, okay, do you know that for a fact? How do you know? Exactly. Yeah. How do you know that? There's a lot of things. Experts will say, well, those new guys, they don't know anything. Or those guys who never worked in our previous organization. Like, imagine you're a bank which is merged out of 2 banks. I don't know if it's familiar to anyone here, but imagine an expert comes to you and says, hey, those guys from that other bank that joined, they don't know anything. Right, about this, it's something that unique to us, so we need to train them from scratch. Right, turns out absolutely different. Right. In fact, in this, I think you were telling me for this mistake, this 2-bank cooperation, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, one of my and it's one of my best experience working with SMEs was actually when 2 groups of SMEs from 2 different banks, not merging, not having anything in common, but just having a problem in common, came together to create a big learning program, actually a couple of learning programs. And that worked really well because there was this competition. Experts tried to be better educators, better experts, more organized, more on time. So it created very nice competitive environment.
I think what the important aspect of that was also the fact that when those people from those 2 banks came to build something that's industry-wide, they had to let go of their assumptions, because they can say, I know everything about how we train people, what they know in our bank, but I don't know anything about them, so let's research a little bit. And the guys on the other side said exactly the same thing.
Right.
And so they also had third parties, because ideally that training went to all other banks as well. So they had to start analyzing and let go of assumptions. When they work inside your own organization, they will have assumptions, and they can be wrong. And
yeah, and it's beware that those assumptions might not be on the kind of the side of they don't know anything. Very often these assumptions are on the side of they already know this and that. We have
even
to,
more
it
often.
has to be, yeah, it has to be a much deeper material. We have to have all these details because they already know. And this they already know is actually very often a mistake because people don't have that solid base.
Yeah, we often how to research if it's industry wide. That's a good question actually. So I would say, well, you go ahead and research kind of in marketing ways. You can run questionnaires. You can have focus groups. You can build pilot projects. You can again, in one of our breakfasts we explained the MOMS test, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's an excellent book. Google it, Mom's Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. It explains you how to do customer development. Essentially, customer development is going out to potential customers or potential learners in this case, and asking them correct questions that will give you valuable information on what's required of your future product or future training and whatnot. And because it's very easy to ask wrong questions that will, seem like good questions but will not give you valid information. So yeah, I would just say grab a coffee with your head of marketing and ask them how they research and whether you can actually tap into their resources, because they can have all the tools and techniques and even staff to do that. If you're going beyond your bank, marketing will want to be, or sorry, not bank, but if you're going beyond your organization, marketing will want to be involved. All right. Now, another thing that we have noted time and time again about the experts is that they value knowledge as the absolutely highest value thing in the world, because they're experts, even a little bit more than actually practical stuff, and definitely more than emotional stuff. Whereas in training, it's almost reversed.
Yeah.
Right? When we train people, we try to change their behaviors. We try to influence them. We try to make them stop doing what they're doing wrong, start doing something entirely new, or anything along those lines. So we act in the emotional and in doing parts, whereas experts, they roam in the knowledge realm.
Right. And the assumption is, what experts, in my opinion, don't always realize that just by having knowledge, it does not transfer into practice. Whereas for them, that's natural. They've worked in this industry, in this area for so long. It's kind of, I know it, I know what to do, right? I know how to behave. Then they fail to understand very often that applying that knowledge is actually the most important task of training, getting people to do what they are expected to do.
Yeah, and motivating them to do that. Yeah. And knowledge only supports that. So we'll get to the questions in chat in a second. So what experts can do, or what you can do to help, is help them bridge this gap by asking a very simple question. I almost wanted to call this something like emotional gap analysis, give it a great name, but essentially it's a very simple question or two. So ask yourselves, together with the SME, what do they feel now, right? So it's a question that's not asked enough, I think. And we ask ourselves, like, what are they doing wrong? What do they know or don't know? But how do they feel about this subject?
Yeah, let's take GDPR.
Yes. How do they feel now? They don't care. Right? They don't feel that it's important, or they feel tired, maybe at this point.
Or they feel afraid. They don't know that. They know that you have to protect this, so they feel afraid, so they don't do anything around it.
Could be anything, right?
Right.
What will they feel after our course? So afraid, well, maybe they will become more confident. If they are indifferent, maybe they will care more. So it's not about doing, or it's not about knowing, it's about what they feel. And it doesn't have to be this central axis of your training. It's just a question that you need to take into account with SME, and it can help turn around the whole conversation. And out of that question is a natural final question: how do we bridge this gap? So in our training, what information we include, what practical exercise we include, but also how do we bridge this emotional gap? How do we make sure that they feel confident, feel?
Yeah.
Back to the chat. So who does the research, SME or L&D? I would say that something dropped in our office. I would say L&D. I would never trust a subject matter expert because they are biased, right? You ask them to research and they will start doing all those mistakes that we spoke about.
Or I would not completely agree on that because sometimes it's only the expert actually have the access to the information we need, to kind of come to certain conclusions. Like, for example, if you meet an IT guy responsible for IT security, and you start preparing this training, I think they have to bring data on board. How many breaches we have, so what kind of breaches are more kind of what kind of behaviors they kind of see. So, but I think in any case, the role of the L&D is to ask this question and to say, we need to do a research and provide maybe, at least provide guidance. This is how you can arrive to some, solid facts.
You will have to be on top of the process anyhow.
Right.
Yes, but you're correct. I was too quick to dismiss SMEs. They might have access to the crucial parts of that research, because why train them IT security and how to select passwords if our systems in our company do not allow passwords to be set manually, for example, and they're all automatically generated or something like that.
And then we have a question when to ask about feeling and gap in the beginning and end of actual e-training or in analysis phase. I would say that, at least for me, talking to the actual audience is always very valuable to understand this emotion, right? And talking to them in the best case scenario without SMEs present.
Yeah, could help.
That helps a lot. And I think that if you establish what kind of emotion is there, like, for example, we are bored, tired, frustrated about this topic, or we are scared or indifferent, and establishing where do you want to arrive, right? Because sometimes you want to go from we don't care to we are afraid.
I actually have a good example, I think, regarding this feeling stuff. So, one, definitely, this is part of preparation, part of analysis. Before you do the training, you need to identify, the gap and ask those questions. But asking them as part of the training will help your learners to actually focus on their emotions and make it a more guided process for them. The example I had was from a company. There's a company, SurveyMonkey, which is one of the largest companies that do surveys, and they bought a different company, a smaller one, which also did surveys online. And in that company, there's a great case about customer support. So they used to have this customer support form with 7 fields, who are you, where are you from, explain your topic, provide this, what's wrong, who do you want to talk. There was one field that is always there in the ticketing systems, which said, how urgent is your matter? And of course, everyone's matter is super urgent. And of course, everyone was selecting that and so on. So they removed a lot of the fields. They just left one which says, describe the problem. And they also added a field which said, how do you feel right now? And it had options like angry, frustrated, tired, bored, confused, lost, and so on. And then they actually measured, whenever you do anything, you measure this. They measured the frustration of people filling out the first form and the second form. And it turned out the frustration went way, way down. And that information provided in descriptions in that simpler new form was better information. And the way they actually measured frustration, they measured, first of all, they had a dictionary of expletives, like bad words, and they calculated how many bad words per 100 words that people used in describing the problem. And 2, they measured punctuation and caps. So if everyone, lots of exclamation points, big letters, probably somebody is frustrated. So what happened? They actually let people acknowledge and ventilate their feelings by just small selector, and then it became easier for the rest of the process. So feelings do matter even in the most technical things like tech support, for example, and of course they matter in learning. All right, so this is one of my favorite slides. The game here is different. You don't need to guess the movie. The movie is Christmas Address of the Head of State. You can try to guess the states.
Yeah, some have.
There's a trick. There's a trick.
Yeah.
All right, so what we wanted to say, I guess, is that whenever you come to somebody who's an expert in their field, but they are not, a trainer, professional trainer, what they tend to do is, instead of taking the step towards the audience and say, okay, I need to train them, so let me step towards my audience and talk to them like head to head and explain what the problem is and help them get over it. Instead, they take this step back and they say, okay, I'm a trainer now, so I need my tie immediately, and I have to stay with a straight back, and I have to talk in very serious words and language, and I can't smile. And that happens. Sometimes it's funny. You have experts on camera, and I this is like my part hobby at INTEA. I do a lot of camera projects, like video projects with INTEA. So you turn on the camera, and the person in front of the camera stiffens up immediately, and they're like, okay, I'm on camera now, I have to be serious, which isn't true, which isn't helping, which leads to a ton of problems. And that doesn't happen on camera, it happens on in writing as well. So if you write an email to a colleague, as opposed to writing a training page in a course, you will use very different language. Unfortunately, we don't think that it's helping, but people will do that. So what experts think is that they will try to maintain appearances and not relax, and they will always look in their tone and speech and even like physical appearance,
because we have
like
this,
these guys.
Yeah, because we have this culture where being professional means being formal.
Right.
Yeah, and that extrapolates to emails and trainings. Instead of being professional, is helping the guy to do his job better, right?
Like us. Right. So any guesses in there? But
no, nobody's trying to guess. But yeah, there's only two guys without
yes.
banner.
So if and they're both from the same country. Yeah. One is the king, another one is prime minister. Anyhow, so in terms of maintaining appearances, try and work with your experts and explain to them and help them not to take that step back into being even more formal, but rather step forward to being less formal, more helping. Be like this guy, right? This is last year's address, and Boris was so happy he had achieved a lot.
He's showing off that pile of paper.
So yeah, showing emotion is all right if you're an expert, and experts often will not do that. So it's kind of your job to help. All right, next mistake is too much information. It's probably something that comes to mind as number one
every
mistake. Every time, right? So they need to know all of that. Can we cut this? No, you can't. They need to know that.
It's all important.
So it's all important. Yes. Which can you identify important parts? It's all important. Experts will try to make little experts out of everyone. They think that they have a PhD of 20 years, so we will have like 10% of that, and they will try to make you like a small PhD which knows everything. They will start with background information on where this thing started. We actually had this conversation yesterday when, like, imagine GDPR, and you have a training on GDPR, and they will tell you that GDPR came about in 2000 something, but actually there was a previous law from 1995 and instigated by European Commission, which is part of EU, which was formed in like right after the World War II, and first of all it was called the Union of Coal and Steel, but that was actually preceded by the whole nationalist movements and the rise of national states between the two wars, and that was a crisis which was actually caused by the World War I, which was obviously culmination of the empires which.
The age of imperialism that was preceded by the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, which came on heels of the era of great discoveries. When they discovered Australia and went around the world and Americas and so on. But before that, actually. So anyhow,
yeah, and they can go on and on. Right?
Absolutely, they will end up in ancient Egypt and they will not stop there. So how do you combat that? Well. First of all, they need to be aware that there is such thing as too much information, right? You have to be strict and you have to set limits. But there are a couple of tools that you can use. One is our favorite action mapping. We talked about this in one of our previous breakfasts. In super short form, you identify the goal in the middle of all things. Then you identify action. The goal is something that your people have to make less mistakes, serve more customers. Then you identify actions that they need to take to achieve that goal, and then you identify the information that helps them to do that. If that information cannot be related to an action that leads to the goal that you've defined, you don't need that information. Just remove that. That's a very and we spoke how you can use that for yourselves to kind of argue with experts about what's needed and not. But also, if you teach them to use that approach, that can be helpful as well. But again, we went in detail in one of our previous things. So the other one
is too little information.
Right, too little information. Sometimes things seem out of context. Yeah, the detective, excellent. That was the detective season one. That is too little information. You can have things out of context. You can, as an SME, you can assume sometimes that they already know this, and that, so you only have to provide those things. Or you can assume that they don't know nothing, but it will never occur to you that they don't know the abbreviation that you use, for example. Remember that the nuclear stuff?
Oh yeah. I had this situation where I received expert information in German, and when I Googled one of the abbreviation, it came out that this is actually nuclear power.
AKW,
yeah.
Which is atomic Kraftwerk.
Kraftwerk, yeah. And I was really puzzled what they mean by that. And I spent some time before I realized it was some kind of internal jargon they use for some other things, but actually only experts could know.
Right.
So
that was something like almost I think we need to send Uliana a champagne bottle.
Yeah, she's trying hard to win it. So good. You're on the short list for the real Kahoot.
All right. So
or sometimes too little information is a situation that I encounter when there's a new topic, something happens. A new legislation or a new product, and then you meet the expert. And they actually don't know they understand that the training is needed, but they don't have any materials, because experts always rely on some kind of materials. And then again, with that too little information, action mapping is also an answer. So sit down and try to draw that mind map and understand what to generate.
Another example of too little information is actually when a new product comes about and the expert just explains the changes in that product, like what's changed, or the new procedure, like what's new in that procedure. And you're like, I've never heard about the previous procedure. Like changes don't help me. So, when you go to learn about software and they explain you what's new and you're like, but excellent, but what does it actually do?
Yeah.
So it's easy for an expert to assume some sort of knowledge on par of your learners, and then just to provide what they think is missing, and not provide enough context, or use some internal jargon and other things that will not be helpful. So that's a mistake that make quite often. And again, those two are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
You can have too much information while having too little information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Right. So again, this atomic Kraftwerk thing is tied into this one as well. So language and terminology, they will assume that everyone understands them, which is absolutely not true. Thanks, Sharon. That's excellent. See, I mentioned champagne. Things got heating up.
Motivation.
Right. So language and terminology, they do matter. And abbreviations that nobody understands.
And also this formal approach to language, which is a curse for some languages. Like we live here in the Baltics, written language in all, at least in Lithuanian and Latvian, tend to be very formal by default.
Right.
So it's very hard for experts to make this natural step to be more friendly. And I think this is where the L&D have to come in with that guidance, kind of to turn down the formality, the terminology. And again, that all disappears if we concentrate on the goal. Right. I think usually what happens, they already have pre-made material, not made, not created for this audience. Very often I see a PowerPoint about the product that was a PowerPoint for the board of directors,
right?
That is then reused as a training material for salespeople, and that is
what I've seen. What I've seen is a PowerPoint made for kind of training. This is the materials they compiled for you, which was copied from the actual legislation.
Oh yeah, right? Of course.
So I took took the paragraphs from the actual European law and plastered them and highlighted something in bold onto this training. And this is the PowerPoint I've been using for training for for the past year. So we're building a course out of that now. So of course it won't help. The terminology in legislation, in technical matters, can be hard to digest, and experts will. The problem with those mistakes, they're all well intended, right? They don't realize that. They don't realize they are used to navigating and operating in these formal seas. So you have to help them. You have to be aware of that, and also if you're training them, just make them aware of a potential problem out of this. That's actually what you've mentioned, right? Yeah. So reusing old stuff, 1,000 years old stuff. Sometimes an expert comes to you and says, "Yes, that's mommy, the original one." So the expert will come to you and bring a PowerPoint, which has obviously been built in 1990s when they started their training career. And they've been using it ever since, from the funny fonts and word art and those excellent Microsoft Office 95 illustrations, to the fact that it's just not updated, right? In terms of data or examples that they use, or
just the sheer thing that this PowerPoint they have prepared is very often prepared for face-to-face training that is happening in parallel or used to happen before. And the dynamics of a face-to-face training, even as opposed to Zoom call or something, and then as opposed to e-learning, is different.
Right.
So if it has been created for face-to-face training or Zoom training or Teams training, it doesn't mean that it can be just converted into a good e-learning, right? So I would say that just never start the conversation from, okay, you prepared this material, let me take a look at it, and then, okay, what can we do with this material?
Yes.
Start with the action mapping, maybe even disregard the material, even don't look at it.
Just disregard the action mapping, even start with just defining the goals.
Yeah, of course, it's part of
learning objectives, understanding the training needs, what's the gap between what they know and they don't, what they do and they aren't doing, what they feel and what they don't feel, and think how we can help them, and start from there. Because if you say, okay, we have this previous training, let's start looking at that, you will limit yourselves into a certain wheel rut, which you will not be able to get out of. And the expert will try to make you do that. That is the mistake they make, but also that's because it's easier for them, it's more comfortable, more familiar grounds for them. So,
but in so many instances, what I saw at least is that when you meet with an expert and say, okay, before we go into content, so why are we doing this training? What are we trying to solve? They actually, 90% of people, they like that approach, because what experts sometimes won't tell you that they are not comfortable about that material. It's what they have. They throw it on you. They think it might stick, but actually, they do not feel like it's a good material, right? And when you start talking to them and giving them this the advice how to build this training together, they might be happy, and they might. Many experts I had would say, "Yeah, this is what we have, but yeah." Okay, good. Now, so what do I have to do? And then you talk about the homework.
Right.
I like to talk about homework with them. So they might go and check the actual statistics or data on that problem, like find out the key mistakes, or go and prepare a couple of cases, really practical ones that would help understanding, for that matter, GDPR or whatever.
That's
and then it helps to and then the old material kind of disappears from the picture.
Right. So it's also interesting that if you convert a face-to-face training that expert was doing into an e-learning, then very often they have a lot of examples, but they are never in those materials. They are all in the head.
Right.
And if you just go by the materials, you will miss all of those. Whereas in e-learning, if you want it to be practical and down to earth, and if you want to provide like direct behavioral patterns to people, like what do they need to do in this situation, rather than just pure theoretical knowledge that they will have to digest, then you need those examples, and that's the homework for the expert. You can even it can be the pre-homework, right? Even before you meet, try to think of examples and so on. But if you just go with the old materials, you will miss all the juicy stuff, essentially. Right. Okay, so we're almost at the end actually now, and that one is actually interesting. And it also ties into using old materials. So what old materials will also do to you is that they will put you into a certain narrative structure, Tenet, correct? And if you know anything about Tenet, then it's a movie which has super weird timeline.
Yeah.
And what experts will naturally sometimes assume how to structure all this information that needs to go into a course can be anything. We've seen alphabetically, like here's the stuff that you need to learn alphabetically. We've seen timelines, like this is how this problem came to be. It can start, somewhere in ancient Egypt or in the early 1990s, or where our company was created or something. And then it will go into the present era, which again is not helpful to a learner. It can be structured in the scientific way, the way they were taught at the university, or the way it's structured in some sort of regulation, which again was never intended for training. So they will pick a wrong guideline, a wrong structure for the material. And reusing old materials will just exacerbate this problem, because the old materials are probably structured wrongly in the first place. So what you can offer them and what they could do instead is to structure along something more useful to the learner. Because, and I will explain why this is important, because learners, they have, you can use this to talk to SMEs. You all know that learners have shelves in their head where they put the materials on. If you create a new structure, you're essentially creating a new set of shelves. The problem is they already have a set of shelves, and you are better off using that rather than ripping that out and trying to install something new, which will then again be ripped out by their work process and rehashed and so on. That's a lot of energy wasted. So instead, oh yeah, that's actually regarding those in a galaxy far, far away, and structuring along the timeline. But what instead you could do is to structure along a job procedure, right? So your day begins at 8 a.m. This is what you do, and then you have a lunch break, and then you get an email, and then you have a meeting, and then you go home, and on the way you have to answer something, and so on. And you can use that um, as this basis for explaining IT security, for example, or management practices or anything like that. Because people already know how their day goes,
Right.
and they can tie this information to this existing structure in their heads. Another example is customer journey. So a customer walks into our company. Well, how do they do that? Well, they call us typically. Right. What then happens? We register them in our CRM. What happens then? Well, the sales guys will ask them questions and send them promo materials. What happens then? Well, they go to the engineers and they will work with the engineers on something. And then what happens? And so on. So there's a customer journey along which you can structure a lot of stuff, which is product related, customer service related, IT security related, GDPR related, anything. Or again, a business process. Same example, right? You have a process which begins at A and Z. It's already familiar to people. They already know that. Just use those shelves to put this information on, rather than building something from scratch or introducing something abstract, like just a timeline, or alphabetically. Like there's you come to IT guys and they're like, they need to know all of that. Well, how do we train? Well, start alphabetically.
Let's create a huge glossary.
A huge glossary. Glossary is such a great way to structure stuff, isn't it? Yeah. So no. So that's a popular mistake that people actually make, and to help them move away from that is another model that we use. Again, we have not invented this, and there's a book on that. There's also a TED talk on that by Simon Sinek. Start with why. The idea is very simple. If you're familiar with that, we'll just stop here briefly, but there's a ton of materials explaining that, mostly in relation to a product, but also to a learning product quite easily. And you start from the center. You ask yourself, like, why are we doing this? Then you explain how we're doing this. You kind of explain the processes, and then you focus, in their case, on the product, but in this case, on what actions you need to take and so on. But you always start with why. You start from the middle, and then you build around that. Again, if you think back to the action mapping, it's kind of similar. Is that you define yourself a core and then start building around that, kind of like a sculpture where you have this wireframe that you then put stuff on top. Rather than just assuming that out of all of that, out of all this material, something will form and they will somehow lump together. They won't, or it won't look like a good sculpture.
Right. And the difference here, what I see in my practical work, producing those courses, so to say, is that action mapping is for courses that have very clear actions. Then it works perfectly well. Right. That kind of approach. Then what approach works better for behaviors, values, mindsets, things that where you cannot describe every action that has to be taken in relation to this topic, right? So if it gets more abstract, if you have to do a more abstract training or training on some core principles, not actions, then this works pretty well. At least it helps the experts structure their materials in a way that are more relevant.
It's about awareness, right? You have to be aware of this new legislation. Let's explain why, how it impacts you, and then what you need to do. Something like that. Very simple tool to structure your conversations with SMEs, or give them so that they can structure their materials around. This is the last one, the final one, and I think we're doing very well with time. And that's ignoring the first impression. Again, all those things are tied into one another. So if you reuse all the materials, they will look terrible and so on. But first impressions matter. Experts, even in their actual real lives, they tend to ignore the looks sometimes, right? Who cares? Here's the smartest guy in the room. Who cares if his tie is from 1970s? No one cares. But actually, people do care a lot, and they take those visual cues and and then they draw their own assumptions, right? If you didn't care to prepare your slides or to proofread your slides, then probably you didn't care to think about what you were going to tell, or you didn't care to update your materials and so on. Not necessarily, but people will assume that.
Yeah, people will assume that, and I think it's a very bad start for a course or training when the first impression is not good, because then you will spend time proving that actually this is valuable.
Right.
So why start with a minus sign?
Exactly.
If you can start in a better.
Don't put yourselves at disadvantage. But
right.
And while the actual final materials are up to you or up to INTEA or up to not the actual expert, they can undermine this by a lot. For example, again related to old stuff, we've built a training for production company, like industrial company, and it involved filling out paperwork, like on real paper that people put stuff in while walking around a production facility. And they had pictures of those forms on slides, and those pictures, they seemed like they were faxed from somewhere in 1990s, and then that image has been copied and pasted over a million PowerPoints and then resent by email and then compressed and then somehow processed by Microsoft Office and then obviously taken a photo and scanned again. It was like really terrible. And we had to, and when you ask them, like, do you have the image? Like, well, we as instructional designers, we want to show them that actual paperwork. Will you have the pictures? Yes, I will have the pictures. Then you look at the pictures and these are the pictures we have at home. No, we actually had to take a separate trip and photograph all that stuff and scan it so that we have proper. But experts will often kind of draw you into this hey, it doesn't matter what it looks like or what it sounds like, or here's the screenshot I made, don't waste time, and so on. But that will accumulate and overall will make people think that this is not as thorough, as high quality, as caring for them as it actually might be, because people that take these courses, they operate in a competitive environment. They have to make very quick choices about where to put their attention and where to spend that energy, that last bit of energy that they have. And you don't want to miss out by giving into your SMEs ideas about how things might look. Yeah. And again, you will not have 9 seasons or 10 seasons of explaining how things started and making that first impression. Here's this picture.
Yeah, and to add, I think that this first impression has become even more critical now when your experts have to do those Zoom trainings, right? Because there, in that environment, it accumulates rapidly. Not so good, kind of bad sound, not so, bad lights, bad haircuts, slides with wall of text, and it all starts to look really unprofessional, right? Yeah, because it just multiplies. So,
and then people will. The actual problem is that again, people will not. They will not give you a chance, right? Yeah. They in this rapid environment where you have to make real quick choices, is that people will just dismiss stuff real quick and will not give you that chance.
Yeah, Caroline, exactly. When things that go into e-learning, I think it's just the basic, at least by proofread, consistent color scheme, high resolution picture. Yeah, we're talking about all those things as well. That when
what else? Well, lots of stuff. If you include media and video that has to be professionally produced with, we have Uliana here, and we together, trained experts on how to look good on camera, and there are like some basic things that people will ignore and by default, but when you tell it to them, they will be really, really grateful, and that will go a long way. You're essentially selling, your every slide, every minute of your training. So you have to assume that pictures, again, high resolution, that's one thing, but also they have to be relevant and legit, and you can't just trust your expert to go into the actual facility and send you a few pics. You will probably need to go down there yourself and take the proper pictures. You can't use stuff from photo banks or stuff that someone just clipped out of a newspaper years ago. Like we've seen lots of stuff in our lifetime. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff. The looks and probably the visual part. It's a good topic for maybe a whole new practice. We can because that will also be very visual. We can show you, like before and after, and terrible things that people send in, like, hey, here's a logo of our company in an Excel file.
And that's a real story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's the last mistake. That's the end of our show.
There was
we
one
will give
question that we did not answer. If I make material for industry, the level of learners are different. Are there tricks to suit different levels of knowledge in one training? What is better, to enter more basic information or assume that this information should be known? Sure. Sure.
Well, that's the beauty of e-learning, of online training, of asynchronous training, is that you can make it adaptive. You can do a pre-test as part of your course and just let people opt out of certain chapters. You can make the navigation, if you're in your training, open, so people can just grab things that they think that they need. You can provide different levels of materials within one rather kind of in a hidden way or in a very explicit way. But the beauty of online training is that people, if you empower them, people will pick their own path and pick the stuff that they actually need, and will be grateful for not wasting their time on stuff that they don't know, or jumping right over their head with stuff that they are not prepared for. So that's actually less of a problem in online environment and more of a problem in face-to-face training, where it's very easy to spend a lot of time on basic things, and half of people will be bored and half of people will be grateful. So.
Yeah, I remember 2019, my word of the year was to test out.
Yes, test out.
I remember that. Just let people reflect on their knowledge, get feedback in that online course, and skip stuff.
Yeah, give them a test. If they score 10 out of 10, short test. Give them a quiz. If they score 10 out of 10, tell them, excellent, you don't need this course, but if you do want to learn stuff, there you go. If people quiz like 2 out of 10, you can tell them, okay, well, you're doing good on that, but everything else, well, we've opened it up for you. Consume it at your own discretion. Make sure that you've read all of that, and then you can take another quiz and see if it helped. Right? So, or you can even include knowledge in actual feedback of that test. The whole thing can be structured as a quiz where you have this large, multiple slide feedback if you guessed it wrong. Also, that quiz can be, my favorite type of quizzes is the one where you not only provide an answer, but you also indicate how certain you are of that answer. So that if you even if you've guessed, but you weren't really certain, you can get some sort of new feedback on that. That's the beauty of e-learning, and that makes your job easier in terms of adapting to all different levels, but a little bit more difficult in terms of, you will not have this single one-size-fits-all narrative, which you are stuck with in face-to-face training, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope this answers your question. So test out, pre-test, open navigation, let people or rather trust people to know what they need and give it to them. With that, we wanted to give you 10 minutes back. We're giving you 3 minutes back. Thank you for joining. Kahoot next time, Champagne next time. And follow us on social networks. Look for us on YouTube if you want the older stuff. And let us know if there's anything specific that you wanted to talk. In the last 10 seconds of this conversation, give us a shout or a plus or a hand if you think that was useful. And we'll see you in 2 or 3 weeks.